Hey everybody, Ben here with Midwest Climate Engineering Watch, and today we're going to discuss the impacts of the CV-19 lockdown. The video title is Consequences because nothing good has come out of this lockdown. We're going to talk about the health impacts, and we're going to talk about worldwide impacts. So let's begin. RealClearPolitics.com. Tucker Carlson's interview with Dr. Scott Atlas. In the summary, Dr. Scott Atlas has stated about half the people with cancer who get chemotherapy have skipped their treatments. Roughly 80% of brain surgery cases have been canceled. We are talking about people who have not only skipped critical care for acute stroke and acute heart attack, but in addition, all the biopsies for unsuspected and now undiscovered tumors have not occurred. We are talking thousands of those per week. What is even more ironic is that people are skipping their children's vaccines. Not only that have died and are dying, but we are able to create a massive problem by not opening up healthcare with a single-minded policy of CV-19 at all costs. The second part of this is we know how to protect the vulnerable here. It is not so simple. We know who the vulnerable population is. We know that as we go and let people mingle, like the epicenter in New York City, that this goes back to what you said, over 20% of the people in Manhattan were discovered to have antibodies. That's a good number. That would have been higher if we had more social mingling. But we know that young people, young healthier people, I don't see the logic in keeping them isolated. They're viral to keep the transmission going to other lower risk groups and have population herd immunity. Additionally, Dr. Atlas did another interview. The interview goes with Stanford or WesternJournal.com, and it says former Stanford neuroradiology professor, 5 solid reasons communities need to reopen. First, your odds of dying are extremely low. Second, protecting older, at-risk people would eliminate hospital crowding, meaning that should the lockdowns been done properly, only the most vulnerable people should have been in quarantine, not everyone else. 3. Avoiding one another will drag this thing out longer than necessary. He states the vast number of asymptomatic cases have been falsely portrayed as a problem requiring mass isolation. In fact, infected people without severe illness are the immediately available vehicle for establishing widespread immunity by transmitting the virus to others in the low-risk group who then generate antibodies. They block the network of pathways towards the most valuable or most vulnerable people, ultimately ending the threat. 4. There are people with other medical needs that are not being addressed. Critical care for millions of Americans is being ignored and people are dying, he wrote. Most states and many hospitals abruptly stopped non-essential procedures and surgery that prevented diagnosis of life-threatening treatments like cancer, screening, biopsies of tumors now undiscovered and potentially deadly brain aneurysms. An estimated 8% of brain surgery cases were skipped. Acute stroke and heart attack patients missed their only chances for treatment, some dying and many now facing permanent disability. And 5, we have now the data to protect our most vulnerable and take the measures to do so, which goes back to quarantining the ones who are the most susceptible to the virus. Next article by thegardenisland.com, lockdown measures jeopardize student health. What this article goes to say is talk about the 2 Chinese students that died in gym class because they had to wear face masks. What killed them was hypoxia. They weren't able to get enough oxygen into their brains, and as a result, they fell out and died. Other health issues that this article does not discuss in depthly is mental health issues, domestic violence in the home with a student, as well as resource shortages at the home. Moving on. Now we're going to get into the world problems. Starting with The Guardian. The coronavirus pandemic will cause famine of biblical proportions. Article goes to say that more than 30 countries in the developing world could experience widespread famine, and in 10 of those countries there are already more than 1 million people on the brink of starvation. We're not talking about people going to bed hungry. We are talking about extreme conditions, emergency status, people literally marching into the brink of starvation. If you don't get food to the people, people will die. CV-19 is likely to be sweeping through the developing world, but its spread is hard to gauge. What appears to be certain is that the fragile healthcare system of scores of developing countries will be unable to cope, and the economic disaster following in the wake of the pandemic will lead to huge strain on resources. That is truly more than just a pandemic. It is creating a hunger pandemic. This is a humanitarian and food catastrophe. Moving on. Right here at home, same publisher, The Guardian. People are going to go hungry. Pandemic effects could leave 54 million Americans without food. Article says, a record number of Americans face hunger this year as a catastrophic economic fallout caused by the CV-19 pandemic looks to set leave tens of millions of people unable to buy enough food to feed their families. Nationwide, the demand for aid from food banks and pantries has soared. Since the virus forced the economy to be shut down, resulting in more than 40 million new unemployment claims benefits. As a result, an estimated 1 in 4 children, the equivalent of 18 million minors, could need food aid this year. A 63% increase compared to 2018. Overall, 54 million people across the U.S. could go hungry without help. Food banks, food stamps, and other aid, according to analysis by Feeding America, the National Food Bank Network. And it is not good. Moving on. Next article by VOA News. CV-19 puts 265 million at risk of hunger pandemic. About 265 million people around the world are expecting to face acute food insecurity this year because of CV-19 pandemic, according to the World Food Program analysis. The figure is more than double the number of 130 million who were estimated to suffer the food shortages last year. The April analysis came just before the week's World Hunger Day, an initiative of New York-based Hunger Project. The pandemic is expected to exacerbate an already dire situation. 1 out of 9 people now do not have enough to eat, meaning 820 million people face a sustained hunger. We know this is beyond health. It is becoming a hunger crisis and taking an enormous toll on individuals. The hunger pandemic linked to CV-19 outbreak is expected to be caused by economic hardships, price hikes, and substantial breaks in food supply chains. There are no famines yet. However, we could be facing multiple famines of biblical proportions within a few short months. This CV-19 is disrupting food supply chains because farmers and laborers cannot work or travel. Transportation delays are causing shortages, and in the United States, for example, meat processing plants have been forced to close. Not only are these breaks in supply chains affecting availability of food, but also its affordability. Millions who already struggle to support themselves and their families have been struck by economic hardship caused by lockdowns around the globe. Think about that. Think about that. And what are they talking about on the media? Oh, last season of Kardashians, season 14, it's coming to an end. What's going to happen next? We're talking about WAP. We're talking about celebrities breaking up. We're looking at sports, blues, or not blues, but whatever the current hockey teams right now are battling it out for the cup. We're looking at baseball. None of these issues are being addressed or talked about. None. No, nothing to teach you or tell you how to prepare. Nothing. They're waiting until they're pacifying you until the last brutal, bitter minute, until the curtain finally comes down. And those who are not ready, those who are not prepared, those who dig their head further into the sand are going to perish in short order. Moving on. Next article by PLOS.org. Global resource shortages during the CV-19. Bad news for the low-income countries. The world's wealthiest countries have been gripped by resource shortages, including shortages of personal protective equipment and ventilators during the CV-19 disease outbreak pandemic. In order to guarantee these resources for their own nation's health workers, governments around the world are bargaining for their share in the strangled global supply chain. For example, countries such as Taiwan, Thailand, Russia, Germany, Czech Republic, and Kenya have blocked export of all face masks. There have additionally been reports of PPE and ventilator exports being intercepted and delivered to the country with the highest bid, aptly referred to as the modern piracy. Acts of modern piracy. Additionally, learning how to read would help these things go much smoother. And finally, the last article from Time.com. The resource shortage is real. Let that sink in. Put simply, the world's dwindling supplies of arable land, fresh water, energy, and minerals, essential for the production of food and appliances such as mobile phones, cars, televisions, and washing machines, cannot meet rising global demand. Commodity demand is being driven by 3 primary factors. The rising world population, expected to grow from roughly 7 billion to 9 billion by 2050. Increasing global wealth, with an estimated 3 billion people expected to join the ranks of the middle class by 2030. and the marked trend downward urbanization. On the last point, demographers predicted the number of urban dwellers will rise from 3 billion today to 5 billion by 2030, and each of them will demand better quality foodstuffs and modern conveniences that will accelerate the draw of the world's resources. Additionally, on the supply side, however, arable land, portable water, energy, minerals are finite, scarce, and rapidly depleting. Take land. The Earth contains approximately 13 billion hectares, 32 billion acres of land, or an area of 16 times the size of the U.S. Of that, 11%, 1.4 billion hectares, or 3.5 billion acres, is arable and thus suitable to grow crops. The other 89%, including mountains and deserts, is prohibitively harder to exploit than farm. With the world's population exploding, many more people will be looking to live and grow food on smaller patches of land. Then there's water. Although the Earth is 70% water, less than 1% is easily accessible fresh water that can be used for the sustenance of life and helping me read, such as for the drinking and sanitation. Meanwhile, by consuming about 85 million barrels of oil a day, we are living off of oil discoveries that date as far back as 1950s. Moreover, the environmental concerns about fracking and shale could limit their promise so that the alternatives do not offer a real reprieve to global energy woes. Finally, the global supply of minerals like copper is undermined by declining in quality, a shrinking number of discoveries, and increased vulnerability to political interventions. Increasingly, companies have to go much farther afield into more difficult terrain and riskier geopolitical environments in order to secure these minerals. The widening imbalance between rising resource demand and falling commodity supplies means that the commodity prices are likely to continue to rise substantially and thus hurt living standards. Plus, the risks of war and conflicts will increase exponentially. Already there are 25 raging wars around the world, and that their origins in disputes over access to scarce resources, and will likely be many more. Key caveat to this article was back in 2012. When I said that things have been worse for a long time, I mean it. Things have been worse for a long time. I ask all of you, everyone who listens to this, prepare. Buy yourself food, buy yourself water, buy yourself some kind of ability to defend yourself. And when I tell you that the storm is coming, it is coming. Everything right now we're seeing in media is a pacification tools, pacification tactics that go back to previous videos I've showed you with Yuri Bezmenov. I've showed you the climate engineering and weather warfare conducted on us that have been the prime reason why our resource shortage is happening. Remember, information is power.